In the age of knights and kingdoms, silence was a woman's safest weapon. Yet Lady Eleanor of York refused to hide behind quiet obedience. Her husband, Lord Richard, was a cruel man who treated her as property, locking her away in the cold tower chambers of his castle. For years, Eleanor endured humiliation, denied visitors, and forbidden even to write. But parchment and ink were her salvation. She bribed a maid to smuggle letters to the abbess of a nearby convent. Within those letters, Eleanor poured her agony and her plans. The abbess, moved by her courage, rallied support from other noblewomen. One moonless night, a cart bearing barrels of wine entered the castle. Hidden inside one was Eleanor herself. She escaped through secret paths to the convent, where she lived the rest of her life teaching young girls to read and write. Her letters survived centuries. Fragments of courage written by a woman who dared to say no in a time when silence was survival. Her story spread through whispers, the tale of a lady who refused to be forgotten, and whose pen was sharper than her husband's sword. Lady Isolde of Kent lived behind stone walls that gleamed with wealth, but reeked of despair. Her husband, Lord Bertram, ruled not with love, but fear. Servants vanished without reason. Even laughter was forbidden. Isolde spent her days staring through barred windows, dreaming of the forests beyond. Her only friend was a stable boy named Rohan, who once served her family before the marriage. Together, they formed a plan. Using her embroidery as disguise, Isolde stitched secret messages into her gowns, invisible symbols known only to Rohan. On a fog-soaked dawn, a merchant's cart arrived to deliver goods. Beneath its hay, hidden from sight, lay a woman dressed as a commoner. She left behind jewels, silks, and her title. The journey was perilous. Patrols searched roads, and Lord Bertram's men hunted her for weeks. But by winter, she found refuge in a small abbey where she lived quietly under a new name. Some say Rohan joined her years later, disguised as a pilgrim. Legends call her the lady who fled the castle, a story told in hushed tones to every bride trapped behind noble walls, proof that courage sometimes wears a cloak instead of a crown. Lady Mirabel of Aragon was a prisoner in her own manner. Her husband, Lord Conrad, valued her dowry more than her soul. He forbade her from speaking to anyone outside his estate. Yet Mirabel was clever. She used her skill in Latin to send secret letters disguised as holy psalms. These messages traveled through monks, couriers, even the local baker, reaching her cousin, a scholar in Toledo. In her letters, she described her pain, her plans, and her desperate wish for freedom. One autumn, she feigned an illness, claiming she wished to visit the shrine of Saint Eulalia for healing. Conrad, fearing God's curse, allowed it. The moment her carriage left the gate, Mirabel vanished into the forest, guided by her cousin's men. Months later, her husband sent soldiers to find her. But she had already joined a convent in France, where she taught languages and copied manuscripts. Her letters, discovered centuries later in the monastery's archives, revealed not only her escape, but her resilience, proof that even in the darkest ages, a woman's words could open doors no key could unlock. In medieval Europe, a woman's vows were chains. Beatrix of Normandy knew this well. Her marriage to Sir Roderick was meant to unite two noble houses, but behind closed doors, it was a prison. His temper was legend, his cruelty unmatched. After years of torment, Beatrix fled to a nearby cathedral, demanding sanctuary, a sacred protection few dared to challenge. Her husband stormed the doors, sword in hand, but the bishop stood firm, declaring, "No man may touch a woman in God's house." What followed was one of the earliest trials of marital abuse ever recorded. Witnesses testified, servants spoke, and for once, justice leaned toward mercy. Beatrix's courage forced the church to confront the cruelty hidden behind noble doors. Granted an annulment, she sold her dowry to build a refuge for women fleeing similar fates. Her story spread through Europe as the Lady of Sanctuary, a symbol that even in a brutal age, faith could become armor, and a woman's will, her sharpest blade. Queen Adelaide of Burgundy seemed blessed, crowned beside her powerful husband, King Otto I. But behind the golden throne lay fear and isolation. Otto, obsessed with control, turned her court into a gilded cage. He banned her letters, dismissed her ladies-in-waiting, and spread rumors of her disloyalty. But Adelaide was not helpless. Trained in politics and fluent in Latin, she began writing prayers, coded messages addressed to Rome. Within verses of devotion, she hid cries for help. The Pope's emissaries arrived under the guise of a religious mission, secretly delivering her plan for escape. When Otto suddenly fell ill and died months later, whispers spread that Adelaide had not only survived his cruelty but orchestrated her freedom. Whether by divine fate or strategic genius, she emerged as regent for her son, ruling wisely and fiercely. History remembers her not as a victim, but as a queen who turned faith into rebellion. Her reign became proof that a crown could oppress or empower, depending on who wore it. In the heart of Toulouse, Lady Amara lived as a ghost within her husband's fortress. Lord Gerard, a warlord feared across the land, kept her confined, forbidding her from speaking to anyone but her guards. Yet Amara had a weapon no chain could silence her words. Under the guise of prayer, she composed verses so beautiful that even her husband allowed her parchment and ink. But her psalms carried a secret. The first letters of each line formed messages to her brother, a scholar in the Abbey of St. These holy poems traveled through priests and monks who never suspected the truth. For months, she described her suffering and her hope for rescue. Then, on Easter's Eve, her brother arrived, disguised as a pilgrim. That night, amid the noise of celebration, Amara fled the castle dressed as a novice nun, guided by torches toward the monastery. Her husband's men searched for years, but she vanished into legend. Centuries later, monks restoring the abbey discovered scrolls sealed in the wall, her coded psalms, prayers that hid rebellion beneath devotion. Historians call them the verses of deliverance, proof that even in the darkest age, a woman's pen could become her sword and her salvation. Most believed medieval women had no refuge. Yet in the shadows, an invisible network worked to protect them. It began with whispers among laundresses, midwives, and nuns, women who saw the bruises, heard the cries, and refused to look away. Lady Althea of Cornwall was one such soul in need. Married to Baron Reginald, a man whose cruelty was legend. She sent her plea through her maid, wrapped inside a linen parcel. The symbol of a lavender sprig told its tale, a silent cry for help. From convent to convent, her message traveled, passed through the hands of women who owed loyalty, not to lords, but to one another. In hidden rooms, Althea's escape was planned like a crusade. She was given new robes, a new name, Shista Cassadine, and a forged letter of passage signed by an abbot who had never met her. By the time Reginald's soldiers discovered her disappearance, she was already in France, tending gardens in a quiet abbey by the sea. Centuries later, records uncovered the Lavender Route, an early underground path for abused noblewomen. It proved that even in an age ruled by men, women built their own kingdom, one of secrecy, courage, and compassion. Lady Seraphina Verona was said to shine like moonlight, beautiful, distant, untouchable. But beauty was a curse in her husband's eyes. Count Aldo, jealous and paranoid, locked her inside a tower overlooking the river, claiming it was for her protection. She spent her days tracing cracks in the wall and her nights praying for death. Then one morning, a falcon landed on her window. Around its leg was tied a silver ring engraved with strange markings, a code only her brother, once a knight, could send. The design mapped a forgotten escape tunnel beneath the castle, built generations earlier. For weeks, Seraphine dug through dirt and stone, hiding her work beneath rugs and straw. Finally, on a stormy night, she crawled through the tunnel, emerging beneath the forest floor, disguised as a peasant. She wandered for days until she found her brother's rebel camp in the Alps. Together, they fought against noble tyranny, leading raids that freed other imprisoned women. Her enemies called her the Ghost of Verona, her allies, the Lady of the Falcon. In the end, she became a legend, a woman who traded a gilded cage for a sword and a crown for freedom. Lady Margaret declares marriage to Prince Edmund was meant to strengthen royal bloodlines. But behind the palace doors, it became her torment. Edmund was charming before the court, but a monster in private. He struck her, silenced her, and laughed at her tears. When priests refused to intervene, Margaret turned to ink and parchment. Her letters, written to the Pope in Rome, described her suffering in careful Latin. Each was smuggled by monks, disguised as traveling scholars. When the Vatican received her pleas, they were horrified. The Pope sent a decree condemning the prince's actions, demanding he repent or face exile. It was the first time the church publicly challenged a royal husband. Enraged, Edmund imprisoned Margaret in a cold tower, hoping time and isolation would erase her. But her letters spread like wildfire, copied by clerks, whispered among nobles, even read aloud in sermons. Her courage became scandal, and her name, martyrdom. Margaret died before freedom came, but her letters survived centuries, preserved in the Vatican archives. They remain a testament that truth, once written, cannot be silenced, and that even a princess' cruelty could be undone by the trembling hand of a woman with a quill. In the Duchy of Lorraine, 3 women, Helena, Agnes, and Claire, lived under the iron fists of their husbands. Society called them noble wives. They called themselves prisoners, bound by duty. They met weekly under the guise of embroidery lessons. But behind the laughter and stitches lay rebellion. Each thread held coded meanings, symbols for safe houses, routes, and trusted traders. Over months, their tapestry grew into a map of freedom. Helena, the first to flee, disguised herself as a widow on pilgrimage. Agnes, posing as a merchant's assistant, crossed borders, carrying false documents. Claire faked her death entirely, her coffin weighted with stones. Their husbands raged, accusing witches and demanding inquisitions, yet no truth was ever found. Years later, travelers in France spoke of 3 nuns who ran a small refuge for women sent by angels. The old tapestries they wove bore delicate vines and hidden letters, guiding others to safety. Historians now call them the Sisterhood of the Silent Needle. Their courage proved that even in a world ruled by swords and crowns, freedom could be stitched quietly, thread by thread, by hands that refused to tremble. For Lady Isabel of Devon, marriage was not a union but a sentence. Her husband, Lord Cedric, was known for cruelty, a man who boasted that obedience was a wife's only beauty. He locked Isabel's jewels away, stripped her of her servants, and even forbade her to speak during meals. But silence sharpened her mind. One winter's night, when the castle's fires burned low, Chevelle bribed the blacksmith to break her ankle chain, promising him gold from her hidden dowry. Dressed as a servant, she rode a stolen horse through sleet and darkness until her hands froze on the reins. She reached a convent at dawn, half-conscious, whispering one word: sanctuary. The abbess hid her and forged documents claiming she was a pilgrim from Ireland. Cedric searched for months, threatening priests and nobles alike, but Isabel vanished into legend. Years later, pilgrims visiting the convent told of a woman who taught reading to abandoned girls, always wearing a silver chain around her wrists, a reminder of her past captivity. In her final years, she called herself Isabel the Free. Her story became a warning to cruel husbands and an anthem to women whose spirits refused to be bound by iron or fear. Lady Aveline of Brittany was known for her quiet smile, the kind that hid storms beneath it. Married to Lord Henry, a knight obsessed with control, she endured years of silence and scorn. Her husband's temper turned every word into danger, every gesture into threat. Yet Aveline's courage grew in secret. She joined a group of noble women who met under the pretense of prayer, but truly discussed forbidden books, writings about justice, saints, and women who had defied kings. Through their hidden gatherings, Aveline learned of a monastery offering asylum to abused wives. She began leaving home under the guise of confession, each visit bringing her closer to escape. When Henry discovered her plans, he locked her away, but it was too late. The women's network moved swiftly. On the night of the Harvest Festival, a group of veiled nuns arrived, claiming to deliver holy relics.
Beneath their robes, they smuggled Aveline out.
Her husband searched for years, but no one ever found her. In time, Tales spread of a Lady of the Veil, a nun who preached courage to women in whispers. Aveline's bravery was never sung in ballads, but it echoed through every quiet act of defiance that followed. Cecilia of Florence was barely 16 when her father promised her to a man 3 times her age, a merchant whose wealth could rescue their failing estate. But Cecilia's heart belonged to another, Mattea, a young scholar who taught her Latin in secret. On the eve of her wedding, she knelt before the altar, praying for a miracle. That night, dressed in her bridal gown, she slipped through the chapel doors and fled to a convent in the hills. The sisters took her in, disguising her as a novice. For 2 years, she lived peacefully, until her fiancé's men discovered her hiding place. The convent was stormed, and Cecilia was dragged before her family. Refusing to marry, she took her vows as a nun in front of them, declaring she was already wed to God. It was an act of defiance that shamed her father and enraged her suitor. Though confined to the convent for life, Cecilia found freedom within its walls. She became an abbess, renowned for her wisdom and writings. Centuries later, her letters were found, filled with love, loss, and faith. She wrote, "Better a cage of peace than a palace of pain." Her choice became legend, the bride who saved her soul by refusing her vows. Divorce in the Middle Ages was nearly impossible, yet a few women dared to challenge the law and the church itself. One of them was Eleanor of Aquitaine, whose story echoed across Europe. Married first to King Louis VII of France, she endured years of coldness and neglect. Their union, built for politics, not affection, suffocated her. Eleanor used her intelligence as her weapon, gathering evidence of their incompatibility and presenting it to the church. Against all odds, she won an annulment, a scandal that rocked the throne. But her defiance didn't end there. Weeks later, she married Henry Plantagenet, soon to be King of England, choosing passion over politics. Her boldness inspired noble women across Europe to question their own marriages, whispering, "If a queen can leave, why not we?" Though her second marriage brought new challenges, Eleanor's independence shaped the history of 2 nations. She became known as the queen who would not bow. Even centuries later, her courage stands as a rare symbol of a medieval woman who refused to be owned, proving that, sometimes, rebellion wears a crown and speaks in a queen's calm voice. Beyond the castle walls, monasteries became secret havens for desperate women. Lady Rosamond of Somerset found herself trapped in a marriage to Lord Edwin, a man whose cruelty knew no mercy. When he threatened to sell her dowry lands, Rosamond fled under the cover of night with the help of her handmaiden, Eleanor. They rode for days, hiding in stables and barns, until they reached the Abbey of St. Brigid. There, the abbess recognized her noble bearing but said nothing. Rosamond traded silk for simplicity, living as Sister Catherine. For years, she copied sacred texts and tended gardens, her husband believing her dead. When she finally passed away, the abbess revealed her secret identity and the truth of her flight. Her tombstone bore no title, only the words, "She found peace here." Later generations of noblewomen sent letters to the abbey, asking for sanctuary under the name Catherine. Thus began a tradition of refuge, women escaping cruelty through faith and courage. Lady Rosamond's story spread in whispers, her name erased but her courage immortal. In a world ruled by men, she found the one kingdom they could not reach: the silence of a monastery and the freedom within it. Lady Isadora of Lancaster was famed for her beauty, but behind her noble smile lay fear. Her husband, Lord Geoffrey, was known for his cruelty, a man who treated his wife as a pawn in his endless games of war and pride. Isadora's only comfort was her embroidery, a skill that would soon become her salvation. Using colored threads, she began stitching secret symbols into her tapestries, hidden codes revealing the layout of her husband's castle, the guard rotations, and the secret passages below the Great Hall. Her confidant, a stable boy named Thomas, memorized the patterns and prepared her escape. On a moonless night, Isadora dressed in a servant's cloak, carrying only a candle and a small dagger. As the bells of midnight tolled, she slipped through the hidden tunnels, guided by torchlight and the sound of hooves waiting beyond the walls. By dawn, she vanished into the countryside. Geoffrey's fury shook the realm, yet no trace of her was ever found. Centuries later, one of her tapestries was discovered, woven with strange, geometric designs. Historians realized it wasn't art, but a map of freedom. Isidora's story became legend. The lady who embroidered her own escape, thread by thread, under her husband's watchful eyes. In 1312, Duchess Eleonora of Milan vanished without a trace. Her husband, Duke Alaric, claims she died of illness, but rumors spread through the court's whispers of poison, betrayal, and escape.
Eleanora had been known for her intelligence, her poetry, and her compassion for the poor.
Yet beneath her grace, she lived in fear. The Duke's jealousy bordered on madness. He forbade her to speak to any man, even priests. But Eleonora's attendants later revealed strange happenings before her disappearance. A hooded visitor arriving at midnight, and a sealed chest that left the castle days before she did. Years later, a letter surfaced in Florence, written in her hand. It described how she faked her death with the help of a loyal apothecary, using a potion to simulate death. She escaped her coffin that very night and fled to a convent under the name Sister Rucia. There she lived quietly for 20 years, tending to orphans and writing poetry under pseudonyms. When she died, a ring bearing the Milanese crest was found on her finger. Historians now call her the Duchess who chose death over chains. Her vanishing act became one of medieval Europe's most enduring mysteries and symbols of silent rebellion. The Dark Ages were brutal for women, their voices drowned by laws, customs, and the church itself. Yet some learned to fight with wit instead of weapons. Lady Odette of Normandy was married off to Count Raoul, a warlord twice her age. He despised intellect in women, but Odette used that prejudice to her advantage. Pretending to be simple-minded, she listened in silence as her husband discussed politics, lands, and troop movements. At night, she recorded every detail in coded notes hidden inside psalms and cookbooks. When the Count's tyranny grew unbearable, she used that knowledge to blackmail neighboring lords, promising them his secrets in exchange for her safety. Raoul was soon betrayed by his own allies, his estate seized under the guise of royal justice. By then, Odette had already disappeared, sailing to England under a false name. There, she became a scribe in a noble household, teaching young women how to write the very skill her husband forbade. Her cunning changed her fate without a drop of blood spilled.
Odette's story reminds us that intelligence was the quietest rebellion of all, and in a world ruled by swords,
the sharpest blade sometimes came from a woman's quill. In the dusty archives of an abbey in France, monks once discovered a collection of letters bound in faded silk. They were written by dozens of women, queens, wives, and peasants, all pleading for release from cruel marriages. Historians call them the Letters of Rebellion. One, written by Lady Blanche of Rouen, told of nightly beatings and her desperate attempt to find sanctuary. Another came from a miller's wife named Marguerite, who ran into the woods to escape her husband's rage, surviving on berries and rainwater. The letters were never meant to reach Rome. They were confessions written to God, hidden behind altar stones and between pages of psalters. Yet together, they form a haunting chorus, voices that refused to vanish. Decades later, these writings were discovered by a sympathetic abbot who copied them, preserving their pain and courage for history. Today, scholars believe those letters sparked one of the earliest church debates on women's protection and marriage. Each parchment carried not just ink, but defiance, the whispers of women who believed freedom was worth eternal damnation. Their words still echo, centuries later. A testimony that rebellion can begin with a single trembling hand, writing truth in candlelight. For Lady Edith of Suffolk, her wedding day felt more like a funeral. At just 17, she was given to Sir Lionel, a man twice her age, and known for cruelty. Her laughter vanished. Her home became a gilded cage. Every door was locked, every letter censored. But Edith's will could not be broken. She befriended a servant girl named Marta, who taught her to hide messages in everyday items, the folds of a dress, the seams of a pillow. Together, They built a plan. Edith claimed she wished to commission new candles from a nearby abbey, where she secretly met a sympathetic monk. For months, they exchanged notes until he arranged her flight. One stormy night, Edith escaped disguised as a widow, traveling by wagon to the northern coast. When Lionel learned of her disappearance, he burned her portrait in rage. Years later, a nun named Sister Beatrice in a distant convent was found wearing Edith's wedding ring. It was she! Lady Edith lived quietly, caring for the sick until her death. Her life became a lesson, whispered among noble daughters. A cage may hold the body, but never the spirit. And that spirit, she proved, can always find its key. Princess Amara of Castile was raised to obey. Her betrothal was arranged when she was only 9. A political alliance meant to unite 2 kingdoms. By 18, her wedding was set to a man she had never met, King Rodrigo, known for his temper and thirst for power. The night before the ceremony, Amara overheard servants whispering tales of his cruelty, how he de-imprisoned his first wife in a tower until she starved. Terrified yet resolute, Amara turned to her childhood nurse, Ines, who had served the royal family for decades. Together, they planned her escape. Ines smuggled a servantess cloak into Amara's sea chambers and arranged for a fisherman's boat to wait by the shore. As dawn broke and wedding bells echoed across the castle, the bride was gone. By the time Rodrigo's guards searched the coast, the ship had already vanished into the mist. Years later, rumors spread of a woman running a small healing house in Sicily. Her patients called her the Queen of Mercy. Though her crown was lost, her freedom was won. Her story became a legend across Europe. The royal bride who chose the stormy sea over a gilded cage. Proving that courage, not bloodline, defined true nobility. The chronicles of medieval Europe rarely mention the silent rebellions of women, but behind castle walls, whispers of resistance stirred. Marjorie of Kent, a merchant's daughter, was married to a violent knight who treated her like property. For years she endured beatings, her pleas unheard by the church. But Marjorie found strength in unexpected places: the kitchen servants, the washerwomen, the stable boys, all who had witnessed her suffering. Together, they formed a web of quiet allies. One night, as her husband attended a royal feast, Marjorie fled through the back gate with their help. She disguised herself as a pilgrim, walking barefoot for miles until she reached Canterbury. There, she sought refuge among nuns who offered her a new identity and a new life. Years later, she became a midwife, aiding other women who suffered as she once did. Her story was told in hushed tones, passed from mother to daughter. It wasn't about revenge or grandeur. It was about survival. In an age that silenced women, Marjorie's escape was her loudest cry. She became a symbol for countless others, proving that even in darkness, a single act of courage could light the path for generations to come. In a forgotten chamber beneath a ruined castle in Burgundy, historians discovered a small chest sealed with wax. Inside were fragile, time-worn pages, the diaries of Lady Rosamond, written in secret during her marriage to Lord Tristram, a man feared for his cruelty. Her words were raw, trembling, and powerful. She detailed the bruises she hid beneath silk sleeves, the fear that haunted her nights, and the small acts of rebellion she dared, hiding coins, sending coded prayers to nuns, teaching servants to read forbidden texts. But among her entries lay a plan. When the moon wanes thrice, she wrote, I shall not be here. With the help of her maid. Rosamond drugged her husband's wine and escaped through the tunnels once used by smugglers. 4 months, she hid among gypsies and peasants, trading jewels for passage to Flanders. Her diary ends with a simple line, I breathe freely at last. Centuries later, her writings gave historians a rare glimpse into the hidden suffering and resilience of medieval noblewomen. Her courage transcended time, reminding us that even when trapped in fear, the written word can become a weapon. And truth, when whispered to paper, can outlast oppression. Lady Evelyn of Artois was born into luxury, jewels, feasts, and silken gowns. But her marriage to Lord Cedric turned her palace into a prison. He kept her under guard, fearing her influence and wit. Yet what he couldn't chain was her mind. Evelyn began memorizing the guard's routines, listening through the cracks of her chamber door. Her one ally was a mute kitchen boy who communicated through drawings. He showed her a secret route through the castle's cellar, an old servant passage that led to the stables. On a stormy night, she slipped away, disguised as a traveler.
Cedric's men chased her across villages, but she vanished into the forests of Normandy.
Years later, a noble woman named Lady Mira was reported helping women escape abusive marriages through a secret network of inns and convents. Many believe it was Evelyn herself. Her tale inspired countless others to defy their captors. Centuries later, a single line carved into a castle wall was found. No stone can cage the soul that seeks the wind. It was signed with an E. Her story remains a symbol of courage, proof that even the thickest castle walls couldn't silence a woman's will to be free. In 14th century England, letters were power, and one woman used them to rewrite her destiny.
Lady Agnes of York was trapped in a loveless marriage to Sir Percival, a man obsessed with status.
But Agnes had a mind for strategy. Using her embroidery hoop as a writing frame, she hid tiny scrolls of parchment within its wooden rim. These secret letters were smuggled to her cousin, a clerk in the royal chancery, revealing the unlawful deeds of her husband. Her words reached Queen Philippa herself, who was known for her compassion toward women. When the queen read Agnes's letters, she ordered an inquiry.
Sir Percival was stripped of title and lands, while Agnes was granted sanctuary in a convent.
From there, she began writing petitions on behalf of other suffering wives, her secret letters becoming sparks of quiet revolution. Decades later, her writings were cited in early legal debates about a woman's right to protection. The hidden letters of Lady Agnes proved that ink and courage could pierce even the strongest armor of tyranny. Through her quill, she turned her pain into power and changed the fate of women long after her name was forgotten.
Lady Catherine of Wales was a name spoken only in whispers.
Marriott succeeded to Lord Brenner, a brutal warlord. She endured years of torment, his rage, his cruelty, his endless betrayals. Yet beneath her calm eyes burned a quiet resolve. Catherine studied herbs and remedies under the castle healer, pretending to learn for women's ailments. In truth, she mastered the art of slow poisons powders that cause sickness indistinguishable from fever. When Brenner struck her one final time, she smiled through her swollen lips and served him his favorite wine, steeped with foxglove and belladonna. Within days, the mighty lord lay weak and gasping.
Catherine prayed at his bedside until his last breath, then ordered the bells to toll for his soul.
The villagers called it divine punishment, but Catherine did not flee. She stayed, ruling his lands with quiet justice, protecting women who came seeking refuge. When she died years later, her journals were found, detailing her secret, not as confession, but as warning. When the world gives you no law to protect yourself, make your own. Her name was never erased, nor honored it, simply survived, echoing through legend as the wife who poisoned her chains. The Abbey of Sankmere was known for its peace, but within its silent stone halls, rebellion was quietly blooming. Many women who entered as nuns were not holy seekers, but fugitives. Noble women escaping violent husbands or forced marriages. Among them was Sister Alina, once Lady of Verdun. She had fled her home disguised as a pilgrim, bringing with her secret letters written by other women begging for refuge. The abbess, Mother Isabel, was part of a hidden network that smuggled these women across borders into convents where they were reborn with new names. They called it the Sisterhood of Shadows. Using coded hymns and marked candles, they passed messages between abbeys, warning of knights searching for their lost brides. One night, soldiers stormed Sankmere, demanding Alina surrender, but she was gone. A secret tunnel beneath the chapel led her to safety once again. Decades later, chroniclers found records of these nuns' hidden resistance, cloaked in scripture and song. They weren't warriors, yet their defiance was holy in its own right. Through prayer and secrecy, they gave hundreds of women a second life, proving that sometimes rebellion wears a habit and whispers instead of shouting. In 1427, a single letter changed the course of history. Lady Isolde of Kent had been forced to marry Sir Roderick, a noble favored by the English king himself. When Roderick began abusing her, Isolde wrote to the royal court, but her pleas were ignored. So she did the unthinkable. She wrote directly to the Pope. Her letter, smuggled through merchants and monks, detailed not only her husband's cruelty, but also the king's role in covering it up. It reached Rome, and within months, the scandal broke across Christendom. The Pope demanded inquiry. Priests read her words aloud from pulpits. The king was humiliated, and Sir Roderick was stripped of his titles. Isolde vanished soon after, rumored to have fled to France under the name Sista Marion. Her courage inspired noble women across Europe to write their own letters of complaint, the first ripples of a silent revolution in ink. Decades later, her letter was found, preserved in Vatican archives,
Marked only with her initials. IFK scholars still call it the letter that brought down a king.
Isolde's pen was her sword, and her truth, sharper than any blade forged in the Middle Ages. Not all queens wanted crowns. Some wore them like chains. One such woman was Queen Adela of Hungary, wed to King Borislav, a tyrant feared by all. Their marriage was one of politics, not love, and within the palace walls, Adela suffered in silence. But she had a plan.
With the help of a loyal maid and a foreign ambassador sympathetic to her plight,
Adela arranged her escape during a royal feast. Disguised as a servant, she slipped out of the castle in the confusion of a staged fire. For years, she lived in exile in Venice under the name Lady Celeste, teaching music to noble daughters. When Borislav died suddenly in battle, Venice received a mysterious guest, an elderly nun who donated her fortune to orphan girls, signing only A of Hungary. Her story spread through whispers and songs, retold by minstrels as the queen who fled the crown. Adela's life proved that even royalty longed for freedom, and that the highest throne in the world could still be a prison for a woman's soul. History remembers kings, wars, and conquests. But hidden beneath those grand tales are women who fought unseen battles. They didn't lead armies or wield swords, yet their defiance shaped the world in quieter ways. There was Elise, a peasant who ran from her husband and found sanctuary with gypsies. Margaret, a baron's wife who disguised herself as a man to sail across the channel. And Clara, a nun who forged false letters of annulment to free other women. Each risked death for freedom. They left no monuments, no songs, no royal seals, only fragments. A diary here.
A ring there. A name carved into a convent wall. Yet these fragments speak louder than silence.
They show that courage didn't belong only to knights. It lived in every woman who dared to say no. In a world built to silence her, their stories remind us that rebellion often begins not with swords, but with whispers, and that even in the darkest centuries, the human spirit always found a way to break its chains.